They said she was not qualified. They said it was too dangerous. They said a woman could not handle the pressure at 30,000 feet. But when Flight 723 began its terrifying descent into chaos, everyone on board would learn the truth. One person stood between disaster and survival, and she was exactly who they said did not belong there. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. And please like and subscribe for more videos like this. Sarah Mitchell walked through the airport terminal at 5:30 in the morning, her uniform crisp and her flight bag slung over her shoulder. She had been a commercial pilot for 6 years, but today felt different. Today she was stepping into the captain's seat for the first time on a major international route. The airline had finally promoted her after years of being passed over. Her hands were steady as she checked in at the crew desk, but her heart raced with a mixture of excitement and something else. Something that felt like the weight of 1,000 doubting eyes on her back. The flight deck of the Boeing 767 gleamed under the pre-dawn lights. Sarah ran through her pre-flight checks with practiced precision. Every switch, every gauge, every reading. She had logged over 5,000 flight hours, trained in simulators that threw every conceivable emergency at her, and studied until her eyes burned. But she knew that none of that mattered to the people who whispered in the hallways. To them, she would always be the diversity hire. The woman who got the job because the airline needed to improve its image, not because she earned it. Her co-pilot arrived 20 minutes later. Derek Hawthorne was a veteran with silver streaks in his hair and 15,000 flight hours under his belt. He nodded curtly when he saw her in the captain's seat. His face remained neutral, but Sarah caught the slight tightness around his eyes. He had expected to be captain on this flight. He had trained the last 3 men who sat in that seat. Now he was second in command to someone he had never flown with before. Someone who, in his mind, had not paid her dues. The passengers began boarding at 6:15. Business travelers typing on laptops, families with sleepy children, an elderly couple holding hands. 247 people who trusted that the person flying this aircraft knew exactly what they were doing. Sarah watched them through the cockpit door, feeling the responsibility settle onto her shoulders like a physical weight. This was what she had worked for. This was her dream. But as she turned back to the controls, she caught Derek's reflection in the windscreen. He was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. Flight 723 pushed back from the gate at 7:05, exactly on schedule. Sarah's voice came through the intercom, calm and professional, welcoming everyone aboard and outlining the flight plan. They would cruise at 37,000 feet, covering the distance in just under 5 hours. Weather looked clear. Everything was perfect. As they taxied toward the runway, Sarah felt her confidence building. This was where she belonged. This was what she was born to do. The takeoff was flawless. The aircraft lifted smoothly into the brightening sky, and Sarah felt that familiar thrill as the ground fell away beneath them. Derek handled the radio communications while Sarah flew, his responses clipped and efficient. They settled into their cruise altitude, and for the first 2 hours, everything proceeded exactly as planned. The sun rose fully, painting the clouds below them in shades of gold and pink. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Maybe this flight would silence some of the doubters. Maybe they would see that she belonged here. Then the first warning light appeared. It was small, barely noticeable at first. A yellow indicator on the engine monitoring system. Sarah's eyes went to it immediately, her training kicking in. She checked the readings. Engine pressure looked normal. Temperature was within range. It could be a faulty sensor. She made a note in the log and continued monitoring. Derek glanced at the light but said nothing. 2 minutes later, another light joined it. Then another. The cockpit began to glow with warning indicators like a Christmas tree. Sarah's heart rate picked up, but her hands remained steady on the controls. She began running through the emergency checklist, her voice calm as she spoke to Derek. Engine oil pressure was dropping on the number 2 engine. Hydraulic fluid levels were falling faster than they should. Something was very wrong, but the cause was not immediately clear. Derek's face had gone pale. He grabbed the emergency procedures manual, flipping through pages with shaking hands. Sarah could see the panic starting to creep into his movements. The aircraft shuddered. It was a subtle vibration at first, but it grew stronger within seconds. Passengers in the cabin would be feeling it now, looking around nervously, wondering if this was normal. The flight attendants would be trying to keep everyone calm while their own hearts pounded. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Multiple system failures like this were rare. Almost impossible unless something catastrophic had happened. She needed to think clearly. She needed to keep everyone alive. Derek fumbled with the radio, his voice cracking as he declared an emergency to air traffic control. Sarah was already plotting their options. They were over open water, still 2 hours from the nearest suitable airport. But with the way the systems were failing, they might not have 2 hours. The number 2 engine began losing power. The aircraft started to list slightly to one side. Sarah made a decision. She would shut down the failing engine before it tore itself apart and caused more damage. Her hands moved across the controls with absolute certainty. The vibration lessened as the engine spooled down. But now they were flying on one engine over the ocean with multiple hydraulic systems showing red warnings. The backup systems were kicking in, but Sarah could feel the aircraft becoming harder to control. It was like trying to steer a car with failing power steering. Every input required more force, more concentration. Derek was still on the radio, coordinating with air traffic control, but his voice was rising in pitch. He kept looking at Sarah as if waiting for her to admit she could not handle this, waiting for her to hand control over to him. But Sarah's voice remained steady. As she spoke to the cabin crew through the intercom, she explained that they were experiencing technical difficulties and would be diverting to the nearest airport. She did not mention how serious the situation had become. She did not tell them that the flight control computers were starting to fail, that the aircraft was becoming increasingly unstable, that every pilot she had trained with had said this exact scenario in the simulator was nearly impossible to survive. She simply told them to prepare the cabin for a possible rough landing and to keep the passengers as calm as possible. Air traffic control came back with vectors to an airport on a small island. It was a shorter runway than ideal, surrounded by mountains on 3 sides and ocean on the 4th. In good conditions, with a fully functioning aircraft, it was a challenging approach. In their current state, it might be impossible. Derek looked at the approach plates and shook his head. He suggested they try to make it to the mainland, to a bigger airport with longer runways and better emergency services. But Sarah had already done the calculations in her head. They would not make it that far. The systems were failing too quickly. This island airport was their only chance. She banked the aircraft carefully, fighting against controls that seemed to have a mind of their own. The hydraulic failure meant that the normal flight control systems were barely responding. She was essentially flying this massive aircraft using only the backup mechanical systems and raw physical strength. Sweat began to bead on her forehead, but her jaw was set with determination. Every lesson she had learned, every hour in the simulator, every moment of doubt she had pushed through was preparing her for this exact moment. The descent began. Sarah had to calculate everything manually because the flight computers were giving erratic readings. She needed to lose altitude at exactly the right rate, bleed off speed precisely, and line up with a runway she could barely see through the clouds. One mistake, and they would either overshoot into the mountains or undershoot into the ocean. Derek had gone silent beside her, gripping his armrests. His experience meant nothing in this moment. All the hours he had spent looking down on her training, all the times he had questioned whether she deserved to be there, had led to this. He could not help her now. She was alone with her skill and her will to survive. The island appeared through the clouds like a small green jewel in an endless blue expanse. Sarah could see the runway now, a thin strip of concrete that looked impossibly short from this altitude. She adjusted their approach angle, compensating for the crosswind that was pushing them off course. The aircraft fought her every input. It wanted to roll, to drop, to do anything except fly straight, but Sarah's hands were like iron on the controls. She had trained for this. She belonged here, and she was not going to let 247 people die because some people thought she was not good enough. The final approach was a battle against physics and failing machinery. Sarah called out altitude readings to herself, her voice steady even as her muscles screamed from the effort of holding the aircraft level. 500 feet, 400, 300. The runway was rushing up to meet them now. She could see emergency vehicles lining the sides, their lights flashing. The flight attendants would have everyone in brace position. Somewhere in the cabin, people were praying. Others were crying. All of them were trusting that the person flying this aircraft knew what they were doing. 200 feet. Sarah pulled back on the throttle of the remaining engine, feeling the aircraft slow. She needed to time this perfectly. Too fast and they would overshoot the runway. Too slow and they would drop out of the sky. 100 feet. She could see individual people now, ground crew watching with horrified faces. 50 feet. The aircraft was shaking like it wanted to tear itself apart. 20 feet. Sarah pulled back on the controls with everything she had, flaring the nose up to bleed off the last of their speed. The main landing gear hit the runway with a screech of tortured rubber. The aircraft bounced once, then settled. Sarah immediately deployed the thrust reversers on the working engine and stood on the brakes. The runway markers were flying past. They were going too fast. The end of the runway was approaching with terrifying speed. Beyond it was a steep drop-off into the ocean. Sarah could see the waves crashing against rocks. She pressed harder on the brakes, feeling the heat building in them, knowing they were on the edge of failure. The aircraft slewed slightly to one side, but she corrected it. 50 meters from the end of the runway, the aircraft finally shuddered to a stop. For a moment, there was absolute silence in the cockpit. Then the radio exploded with voices. Air traffic control asking if they were okay. Emergency services requesting permission to approach. Derek was staring at Sarah with an expression she could not quite read. His hands were still gripping the armrests so tightly his knuckles were white. Sarah calmly shut down the remaining engine and began the post-landing checklist. Her hands were steady. Her voice was calm. It was as if she had just completed a routine flight, not saved everyone on board from certain death. The passengers erupted in applause as the emergency slides deployed and evacuation began. Everyone got off safely. No injuries, not even minor ones. As Sarah finally stood up from the captain's seat, her legs felt like water. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the magnitude of what had just happened was starting to sink in. She had done it, against impossible odds, with failing systems and a co-pilot who had doubted her from the start. She had brought everyone home alive. The investigation took 3 weeks. Engineers pored over every inch of the aircraft. They found that a microscopic crack in a hydraulic line had catastrophically failed, triggering a cascade of system failures. It was the kind of mechanical fault that could happen to anyone on any flight with any pilot. But it had happened on Sarah's first flight as captain. When the final report was published, it stated clearly that the successful landing was due entirely to exceptional piloting skill and decision-making under extreme pressure. The investigator noted that many pilots, even highly experienced ones, would not have been able to land the aircraft safely given the conditions. Derek Hawthorne requested a meeting with Sarah a month after the incident. They sat in a quiet corner of the crew lounge, and for the first time, he looked at her without that tightness around his eyes. He told her he had been wrong. He admitted that he had not believed she deserved the captain position. He had thought she was promoted too quickly, that she had not earned it the way he had earned his position. But watching her in that cockpit, seeing how she handled a situation that would have broken most pilots, had changed everything. She had not just saved the passengers, she had saved him too, and he would never forget it. The story of Flight 723 spread through the aviation community like wildfire. Sarah Mitchell became known not as the diversity hire or the woman who got the job to make the airline look good. She became known as the pilot who did the impossible, the one who kept her head when systems failed and doubts surrounded her. Other women in aviation reached out to her, sharing their own stories of being underestimated and overlooked. Sarah realized that her fight that day had not just been to land an aircraft. It had been to prove something that should never have needed proving. That skill has no connection to what you look like or where you come from. That excellence is earned through work and dedication, not granted because of who you are. The airline promoted her to senior captain and made her a training instructor. Now she spends her time teaching the next generation of pilots, both men and women, how to handle emergencies with calm precision. She tells them about Flight 723, not to brag, but to illustrate a crucial point. When systems fail and everything goes wrong, your training will save you. Your preparation will guide you, and your belief in yourself, even when others doubt you, will carry you through the impossible. Sarah still flies regular routes, still feels that thrill every time the wheels leave the ground. But now, when she walks through the terminal, other crew members nod with respect. Young women in pilot uniforms stop her to say thank you, to tell her that seeing what she did made them believe they could do it too. And sometimes, late at night, when she is alone in a hotel room far from home, Sarah thinks about that morning, about the moment she sat down in the captain's seat for the first time and felt the weight of every doubt, every whispered comment, every skeptical look, about how close they had all come to disaster, about how her hands had stayed steady when everything around her was falling apart. They thought it was too dangerous. They thought she could not handle the pressure. They were so certain that giving her that position was a mistake waiting to happen. But when Flight 723 needed a miracle, she did not just deliver one. She proved that the only mistake had been doubting her in the first place. The aircraft that everyone thought was doomed made it safely to the ground because someone, who was not supposed to be there, refused to fail. Someone who had been told no so many times that yes had become the only answer she would accept. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe for more videos like this.